welcome to Bookish and Unbalanced, the podcast that talks all about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful of mental health in the queer book community. I'm Amy Spencer.
And I'm Katie Trapp.
And I'm Adrienne J. Smith.
From authors, editors, publishers, readers, and reviewers, we all have a state of mental health and neglect talking about it. Or worse yet, we're ashamed to talk about it. So let's break that stigma. On today's episode, we're interviewing the author Hayden Quinn. Hi, Hayden.
Hi, good to see all of you.
So can you tell a little bit about yourself as an author?
So I've been writing forever. I've written fiction for the longest time. Before I could write properly, I would just do like pictures, like storyboard kind of stuff. And then I did a degree in English and creative writing, which is a big waste of time and money for me. But once I finished was when I wrote my first novel, and kind of started taking it a bit more seriously. I'd had a lot of false starts before that. And I think I've independently published 7 novels now, with the most recent being in July, just gone. And some short stories and stuff along the way as well.
So, what do you write?
Oh, good question. Thank you. I write mostly young adult novels. That's what I've always wanted to do and kind of always enjoyed. When I was a teenager, there wasn't really a big teen book scene in the UK. You just kind of went straight from kids' books to adult books, which there's a lot more available now. So that's kind of where I started off, and I've written mostly YA, and a lot of mental health stuff figures into it. You know, the contemporary stories about real life as much as possible. So I do include. I've written books with themes on like depression, suicide, self-harm, along with kind of romance and all sorts of themes. And it's a few YA books and then some more straightforward kind of sapphic romances as well in novella form. And I've been doing that for about 10 years now.
I think I don't know why this shocks me so much, because it really shouldn't, just looking at the generation and who's reading YA books. But when I go to the store and I just pick up books and I see kind of the subjects of the YA books, I'm always like, oh. And most recently, one of the ones I picked up was about like a school shooting and experiencing a school shooting. I was like, that is not a book I would want to read being in the public school system at this particular moment in time in the US. I would not in any capacity. And so it astounds me that YA books cover subjects like that. But at the same time, I'm looking at the current generation reading it going, oh no, that makes perfect sense as to why you would dive deep into that. So there's not really a question there, more just a commentary and exploration of it.
I think there's a lot more exploration of kind of bigger topics and tougher topics. And I do, most of the time I prefer to read YA stuff as well. I don't know why, I just feel like it covers stuff in a bit more depth, maybe because it does go more into the feelings of things. I don't know, but it does. I really enjoy that it can cover so many different topics now. And I think, reading books about things like school shootings when I'm over here in England, where this isn't really happening, and knowing that over there it's such a common occurrence. It's a surreal thing to read about.
Yeah, I did a lot of youth ministry and working with youth. My favorite age group to work with is middle schoolers. So like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So that would be age 12 to 14. Because they kind of have this still innocence about them, but it's kind of also being shattered at the same time. And just, I love watching them grasp onto the real world in ways, and experiencing things with a deeper depth, because they start to understand things in a whole new and different way.
I legitimately thought you were going to say, I enjoy it because I love seeing their innocence shattered and ending there. And was like, that's like
That crossed my
they
mind.
the world, and then they come into it and they go, oh no, actually, this is awful.
I mean, yeah, that is part of it, but yeah. I don't like to read YA books though, but I do love to hang out with those age kids because I think, I don't know, it's nice to see that innocence still. Can you tell us, I know obviously a bit because we've talked previously, but can you tell us a bit about your experience, your personal experience with mental health?
Yeah, I've got plenty of it. It's never been good. Um, so I think just I've had anxiety and depression for the longest time. I think since I was getting bullied in school, just fairly kind of standard ones, and OCD since quite a young age as well. And that's kind of always been there, maybe on and off, but sometimes quite severe periods, especially of depression, and kind of periods of not really wanting to be here anymore. And then that would be kind of up and down through my 20s until it kind of hit breaking point. When would it have been? About 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And I had to take some time off work and just have a real break away from everything. Just kind of did stop everything, stopped interacting with the world, and was off work for 6 months and tried all sorts of creative things as well as medication for the first time, which I'm still on now. Can't see that changing, and I'm okay with that. Just to try and kind of get some kind of a life back. And I'm quite lucky because I'm at a point now where I'm working almost full time again, while I'm studying as well. Got a lot of support around me. So it's a lot better now, but I mean, it's still there. I still have periods of depression. Like I said, I'm still scared of everything all the time. I'm just more able to kind of push through now and carry on with things even when I'm really, really anxious. So yeah, quite a mixed experience.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that typically when we ask that question or when anybody else asks that question, you always think about it in the negative aspect, you know. Not many people will respond to that with a positive view of mental health or positive explanations of their mental health. But
Yeah, I feel like people don't really think about it if it's good so much.
yeah, but it usually, as the conversation goes on, I notice that there's, you know, we start with the deep and the dark, and then it starts to turn up more into the, oh yeah, I've worked on it a bit, so it's much better than it was.
Yeah. I think it's important to tell both sides, isn't it? There's no point in glossing over the bad parts, but it's important to talk about if it is better now and why that is, because that's maybe more helpful for other people as well.
Yeah, and I think just honoring the amount of work that goes into it and into figuring out our state of mental health, but also improving it.
Yeah, because it can always be improved. It's something we can always keep working on well-being, isn't it?
Mhm.
You also work in the mental health profession. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Why did you go into it?
I think I always wanted to. When I was quite young, I was probably about 7, 8, someone in my family was going to therapy. And I asked just in a curious kid kind of way, like, what is that? What's a therapist? And when they told me straight away, I said, that's what I want to do when I'm older. And they were a bit like, well, that's cute. That's nice. You wanted to be a pop star last week, so we're not going to really hold much to this. And that never changed. There was other bits along the way, but I always wanted to do that. And then I started training as a counselor in my early 20s and did quite a bit of it. But then because my own mental health was so bad, it got to a point where I thought it's not really sensible and it's not really right. Other people are talking about what they do when they're struggling, which was like, oh, I clean all around the house and all these different things, whereas my coping strategies were a lot less healthy. So I just thought this isn't the time. So I did other things, and then I've been working in mental health now for almost 4 years in a non-clinical setting where we don't necessarily need qualifications, but they really appreciate lived experience and just different qualities and skills that people have. So I've been there for a while, and now I'm studying again to be a therapist. So I should qualify in about a year and a half and actually be qualified as a counsellor by then. But it's great to study it alongside kind of informally doing that role too, because it's really great experience, and it means I get to help people and listen to people while I'm still working my way to that point. Because it's a long time from declaring I was going to do that at 7 to now being 35 and still not qualified. Even though I always wanted to do it, it's still been a long and winding road to get there. So it's good to be able to do something in that area at least.
What does the system kind of look like in the UK? I'm somewhat familiar with the system here, but I'm just curious what the system is there to be qualified.
To be qualified, I thought you were asking about the mental health system. I was going to say, if you've ever seen a pile of rubbish lit on fire, that's how our mental health system looks right now. It's pretty terrible. But for qualification, it depends what you want to do. If you're quite clinical, you can become a mental health nurse. And I think it used to be that you had to train as a nurse and then keep studying and do mental health. But I think because they're so badly needed, you can now just train as a mental health nurse, which I did consider, but it's a little bit too on the science side. I'm not good on that side of it. Or you can keep training, be kind of psychologist, psychiatrist, or you can go down the counsellor route and train either by getting a degree or train with a college. So you can do that part-time and keep going about your life at the same time. So it's different routes into it. It just depends what you want to do and whether you'll work privately or with the National Health Service.
You mentioned that you currently work in a non-clinical setting at the minute. I don't think they're particularly well known, and I think they have a similar thing in the States. Can you just expand on what that resource is and how it looks and stuff?
I think they're popping up now a bit more around the country. I think ours was the first one in the area, but now there's a few more appearing. And they're called crisis cafes. So it's not technically a cafe, although there are hot drinks. Disappointed people walk in at least once a week thinking we're a real cafe, and then kind of pick up the vibe and realize, no, I just came to get a cup of coffee, and we're like, talk to us about your crisis. So it's the idea is that anyone can drop in. I say anyone, it's like adults over 18s can just drop in and talk to someone in a safe, non-judgmental space, someone that can understand, and we can kind of connect people up with other services if they need it, or it's just a safe space to spend a bit of time as well. It's a really nice, I think it's called Crisis Cafe because it's just a nice atmosphere and a really nice environment to spend time in. So I assume that's why it's called that. So that's most of what the non-clinical side looks like. And we still work with clinical services. It's still all connected. But it just means that people can pop in whenever they want to. And some of them are open 7 days a week. Some of them are open maybe 3 evenings a week. It just depends on what the capacity is like for different services, because they're all quite independent.
So I've seen something similar here in the US. We just don't call it that. I think it's really more just called a drop-in counseling clinic or something. But I think what's more common now in the US, and Katie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the difference between coaching and counseling. And so you can get mental health coaching online, right? And so that's the huge thing, download the new app or whatever. See, they've got the HIMS app and the HERS app and the Better Me app, and but it's all coaching. It's not It's not necessarily like counseling with a trained counselor. Sometimes it can be, the person can do both. So it's really, that's kind of really what's popping up here, but it sounds similar, just not as like in person.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I know of at least one service that's fairly near to me that is, I think their staff are well-being coaches or something like that. So I think, yeah, it's a very similar thing. And that's, yeah, I think they are really helpful. I think that's more about learning skills to improve your mental health and well-being, which we do a bit of as well.
Yeah,
So,
and for us too, the coaching versus counseling thing is a way to get around the licensing issue, because if you're licensed in one state, you're not licensed in another, and so you can't counsel somebody who's in that state. Like you can lose your license for it. I imagine for you guys it's just one license.
yeah, it's too small to be worth that.
So like, I mean, I live 7 miles from Colorado, but there's doctors and providers that are not licensed in the state of Wyoming. And so they can't treat me because I live in the state of Wyoming. They can treat me if I cross the border and go into Colorado. Yeah. It's a thing. But I think the coaching thing is one way for people to get around that.
See, where I worked, we really didn't have anything where you could go into if you were like, crisis was handled like, we had like a mobile patrol if it was like a real crisis where we would have to worry about them harming themselves. So somebody would just show up that was around that area because everybody had their own little zones. Before when I moved up here to Kentucky, that was in Tennessee. There's a hospital here that you can actually go to 24 hours a day and has one of those little, like, you can just go in and talk. And that was just mind blowing from where I come from because they didn't have anything like that. And as far as I know, I think that's the only thing that I've heard of around here too. I'm like an hour and a half away from there, but they don't really have any of those. Just walk in, like you would have to be put on a wait list. You'd have to be assigned somebody. Then you'd have to go in and have your hour long intake. And then after that, that doesn't help you in the moment at all. Yeah. Not at all.
Yeah, that in between stage of like, I'm going to hit the massive crisis to I can't wait long enough for an appointment. Like there seems to be nothing there for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same here as well, really. The more that you need the help, the longer it's going to take to get it. At least with the clinical services. I mean, you can be talking to someone in a crisis cafe within 5 minutes of walking in and kind of jump straight to it. But in terms of clinical therapy, there's a 4-year wait list in my area for most of it. And that's when it's something they've decided you really, really need. So that can be hard to see.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier about it's really hard to get support when you're trying to be proactive about not getting into a state of bad mental health. Like you have to be like at a point where you're, you know, medically signed off work, or, you know, in a crisis state where you could harm yourself or harm someone else, or do you know what I mean? Like to be able to go, do you know what, I feel like I'm at the top of the slippery slope right now, and I know where my end point's going to be, so I want to do something now. It's really hard to then go, yeah, I need something proactive, because like then they ask you questions when they're trying to assess you, and it's like you don't feel like, why do I have to answer questions about how bad I could be versus how bad I am now to be able to be getting some sort of help? And then when you do answer the questions, you go, I don't think I sound bad enough. Like I feel like the person on the other end of the phone or whoever is going, well, you don't need any help at the minute because you're fine. And it's like, well, no, actually, I know I'm okay right now, but I know if I don't do anything in a few weeks, I could be at a position where whatever you have to offer is not going to be enough, or it's going to be too late. It's going to be after the horse has bolted. And really, I think there needs to be a more open dialogue about being proactive about our mental health past the self-care. And I say that because I have a real issue with the term self-care these days. Stuff we see online and posted by people, and on Instagram and various social media things. I think there needs to be a real kind of a dialogue opened up about that.
I think that's one real distinct advantage to like these crisis cafes and the online coaching, is it kind of gives availability of something.
Makes it more accessible, because we're saying all of this. If you can afford to pay for private care and private healthcare, then obviously that skips the wait lists. That's a lot easier, but few people do. It's really expensive stuff, so not everyone can do that.
Yeah,
so just having to.
It's like, don't even get me started on how you pay for that in the US.
Yeah, true.
It's insane. All I did was work in nonprofit, and those poor people would just be put through so much stuff. It was awful.
Like, here, have your mental health, but you owe us $180 per visit. That's after insurance, assuming your insurance covers it. Anyway, that's a whole different topic for a whole nother podcast.
We've spoken previously about setting ourselves boundaries for the benefit of our own mental health. What's it like trying to deal with both sides of the coin by both working in a mental health setting but also kind of like having your own experiences?
It can be a bit strange, because technically I do know all the right things to do. Technically, a lot of the resources are there. I'm teaching coping skills to other people, but I don't always then think to use them. I'm in therapy at the moment, and today my therapist suggested something, and I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea that I've suggested many, many times, that it's never occurred to me to actually do it, because you don't see it when it's your own thing. So I think it's, boundaries are almost already there. I think the brain already sets them. I think my brain completely separates the work and my own stuff. But because mental health is one of my favorite topics as well, and it is something that I find interesting, even when I'm not at work, it's something that I'll be reading about, talking about. It's something that's always just kind of there. And I find that quite positive in a lot of ways, because I always want to learn more. So there's always more that I can be doing. So I think I never really get tired of it. I never really feel like I have to set a big boundary. But I'm also not the most social, so I don't necessarily talk to that many people. So I do find sometimes people find out what I do, and just start talking. We had someone doing a bit of construction on a house earlier in the year, and day 2 at like 9 a.m. after a late shift, he asked what I do, and I told him, and he starts talking about his PTSD. And then I did set a very clear boundary of like, I'm trying to eat my cereal and I don't need this right now. Visit the service if you'd find that helpful, but I'm not giving that service now. So I think, I've set the boundary if outside of there people kind of go a bit too far. If it's people I don't know, people I do know, I'll listen and talk about it all day long, because I don't feel like that really has that much of an effect energy wise, apart from maybe worried about them. But I find it fairly easy. It's a very roundabout way of saying that.
Yeah, I run into that same issue all the time. I think, Amy, the receiver of the end of me going, why do people start conversations with, hey, can I just ask you a quick question? And I'm like, I know exactly where this is going. And it turned into an hour-long like therapy session. And then as soon as it ended, like the next one started and somebody else came in and saw me like 5 seconds later. And I was like, well, there goes my morning of everything that I had planned. And I was like, yep. I mean, it was good. It was fine. I didn't mind it. But at the same time, it's kind of like when it's back to back like that, it's almost like, oh my gosh, who am I in this room and in this moment at the same time? I think you probably have a bit more separation because you actually get to like go to work. Whereas for me, my job kind of comes with me no matter where I go in a lot of ways, just by the nature of how my job is defined. So I think that separation of like, these are my working hours, these are not my working hours is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that is really important, getting to go somewhere else. And I work in kind of the next city over, but I do visit there sometimes. So I'm also very aware of it's a very, very small city, and I go for my own therapy in the same city, 5 minutes from work. So I'll kind of be walking to the office like hood up and just hope that I don't run into anyone that will definitely start a conversation about things that wouldn't be ideal.
Sometimes you just have to do that. I've hidden from people at Walmart before when it's been a hard day, crouched down so that like I can't do this today, and there they are, and yeah.
Yeah,
And that's looking after yourself.
It's really fun to have those moments where you turn around in the grocery store and you see them and you're like, I would have walked the other way had I known you were standing right there. That's also a topic for another podcast, in the way that boundaries between congregants and pastors, but that's a whole different subject. My therapist mentioned to me the other day, it was a really interesting concept. He observed that I'm not a very porous person, which was hilarious. And I was like, what do you mean by porous? But essentially, like, another person's emotions don't then come into me, which I think is a skill for sure when you're in the counseling world, and you're providing care as well as obviously receiving care. Like, I don't think I know many therapists that don't have mental health issues in some capacity. I don't know. Have you ever heard that term before or thought about that?
No, I suppose I've thought about it. I've not heard that term because porous just makes me think of SpongeBob SquarePants. So
Well, but
it just immediately.
yeah, I mean,
But
that's what it's
makes
like.
sense. Yeah. No, and I think that is important. I think it is a skill. And I've met people on different sides of that, and I think there's a spectrum of that. I've had therapists that had trouble separating and maybe got too invested in the emotional side of things, and I've definitely met a lot of professionals who don't take anything on board and don't connect in any way. And I think there is a nice spot right in between of not absorbing all those emotions, but being able to still be there with the person. I think that is a really important skill to have.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I just want to be very clear, and I don't think this is what you were saying at all, but being unporous, not porous, we're just making up words as we go, is not saying that you're not empathetic, right?
Oh yeah.
Empathetic.
No.
I just want to make that very clear. Like,
yeah, no, you still be really empathetic without kind of feeling the full force of their emotions yourself, because that's not going to be helpful if you're both then feeling the same thing. You can't offer that support, can you really? So
some people think they can.
It's like someone has a cold and you get the cold, and then neither one of you can take care of each other.
Yeah,
it just seeps in.
Are you both man flu people in your house, Katie?
No, Kate doesn't have children. That's why she doesn't understand the need of looking after people, even though you feel like crap.
That explains it.
My wife is a lot more sympathetic to me than I am to her when she gets sick. It's kind of just like, I've given you the meds, I've given you the liquids, all this other stuff. provided the service.
Now stop whinging.
What she wants is your love.
Better wife than I am.
So you touched on this briefly, but I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into it about how your mental health carries over into what you write, and perhaps even how you write, like your process.
Yeah. I think because I'd always wanted to work in mental health, but I didn't kind of get to do that for a long time. I didn't have an outlet for that need. So I just started to include it in my books because that just made sense. But I also, I mean, writing is also a big self-care thing to me. I kind of I kind of notice, I can feel it if I haven't written in a while. At the moment, working and studying, finding the time and energy is hard sometimes, and everything is slowed down. But I do really notice, and I think a lot of my ideas come out of that as well. I'll kind of be thinking, or maybe encounter something different in mental health, and I'll think, oh, that'd be really good to explore. What would be some good ideas around that? I don't kind of start off with a particular mental health issue and think, how can I write around this? But kind of thinking about different characters and thinking, well, that might be an interesting way to explore this. My first book, which had a different title to begin with, because first one's hard, but which is Ways to Fall Apart Now. Someone that I know did attempt to end their life, and I saw the massive impact it had on their family, and on myself as well. And I just needed somewhere that I could put all of that feeling, kind of what I saw going on and what different people went through. And then writing it in a different way. Quite often I'm rewriting different endings and different histories to things that have actually happened. But that just felt like that was healthy for me to be able to write all of that down, to write a similar situation with very different people, but to get all that down, it meant that it wasn't all just sitting in my head. I really should have just had therapy sooner, but I get books out of it, so it could be worse. And that's how a lot of them have gone. It's all very self-indulgent, really.
So it's helped you by getting it out that way. How about reading something that has touched your mental health?
Yeah, I think it's what I like to read about as well. A few days ago at work, one of my colleagues was talking about a book and mentioned that it was about a character with depression, and said it's a really intense read. And I was thinking, well, I'm going to download that the moment I get home, which I did, and started to read it because I just find it very helpful. I find it very validating. I find real life stories like that. A lot of my TikTok and Instagram is people that talk about their recoveries from different things. But I like it in fiction as well. Being able to read about different things people have gone through, and especially how they come out the other end. Because I think that is what I like in stories, is that they come out the other end because the story does have to end. In real life, what I see is the cycle of it more than anything, is people having periods of recovery and then setbacks and going through that cycle. And I've been like that myself. But in books, you get to kind of have the happy ending, and that's the end of the story. And everyone was feeling a lot better by the end. And I think that's what I like about writing it as well as reading it.
Adrian's sitting there thinking, because I know that we said this before, Adrian does not, well, it's not that she doesn't like a happy ending. She doesn't like the books that they're tied up nicely in a bow.
Yeah. I mean, I can appreciate that. I can understand that.
Well, because the cycle and the spiral and it continues. And so I'm always like, it doesn't actually end, right? Like, this is just the stopping point where it's a really nice place to stop. This is how I've convinced myself to write happy endings, by the way, is it's just this really nice place to stop at the moment where everything's going right. But I know as the author that shit will hit the fan again and it will be fine. I just don't have to tell everybody that part of the story.
Yeah, I think that is how it is really. But it's just nice as a reader to forget that for a little bit. You know, the cycle won't continue. Everything's gonna be fine now.
I struggle with that as a reader too. Like, I will gladly skip those epilogues any day because I just don't like them.
Okay, so we've got our rapid fire questions now. So first thing that comes into your head, just give us whatever you're thinking. Maybe not. Well, you know, yeah, that's a dangerous thing to say depending on who we're talking to. But what's your favorite source of caffeine?
Way too anxious for caffeine, completely addicted to Mountain Dew, sugar all the way.
I'm sorry. Do you buy like the non-caffeinated Mountain Dew? There's a crap ton of caffeine in Mountain Dew.
I think
Not
it's made differently in other countries.
Yeah, it's different here because
we have stricter rules about what we can have in our stuff over here.
yeah, ours is just liquid sugar. Because I used to drink like Lucozade and it would just give me massive heart palpitations and stuff. But our Mountain Dew is just pure sugar. Although I do, to be fair, I do drink a lot of the imported ones now that I found shops that have them, so I should look at that.
What's your dream destination vacation?
Finland. I've wanted to go to Finland for the longest time, and it's so expensive. So if I ever have a book that's a really big break, that's where I'll be going.
Where did you see kindness today?
My therapist. That's a good day for that question.
What's your philosophy on good mental health?
It takes a lot of work, but it's worth it.
And where did you find joy this week?
Um,
We're only on Tuesday, granted, but
yeah, I mean, I work weekends, so my week runs very differently anyway, so it's all good. Earlier today, me and my wife and our 2 cats were all sitting under the heated blanket on the sofa watching TV, and that was the most joyful thing. But also yesterday, I gifted my friend this Taylor Swift magazine that has all of the stickers and the posters and things like that. And that made her very happy. So that was joyful too.
Spreading joy.
Definitely. And when it's Taylor Swift related joy, always a good choice.
Brings us to the end of our latest episode of Bookish and Unbalanced. We would love to thank Hayden for sharing with us today. Also, thank you to our listeners for tuning in and getting to know Hayden. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons and keep up to date with our latest episodes. Until next time, take care out there and remember, we are all in this together.
Thank you very much.